The stagecoach wheels kicked up clouds of dust as they rolled into Buffalo, Wyoming territory, and Delilah Garrett pressed herself against the worn leather seat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Every bump in the road made her flinch. Every shout from the driver sent waves of panic through her trembling body. She clutched her worn carpetbag to her chest like a shield, though she knew it would protect her from nothing. The year was 1876, and she was traveling alone to meet a man she had never seen, a man who had paid her passage from Philadelphia to become his wife. The thought made her stomach twist with fear and something close to desperation. The other passengers had tried making conversation during the long journey west, but Delilah had kept her eyes down, her voice barely above a whisper when forced to respond. She could feel their curious glances, their judgment of this small woman with haunted green eyes and dark blonde hair that she kept pulled severely back from her pale face. Let them think what they wanted. She had learned long ago that drawing attention only brought pain. As the stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, Delilah forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each breath the way she had taught herself to do when the fear threatened to consume her. 1, 2, 3. Her hands shook as she smoothed down her faded gray traveling dress, one of only 2 dresses she owned. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows and the hem was frayed, but it was clean. She always kept herself clean, as if the water could wash away the memories that clung to her skin like cobwebs. The driver opened the door with a flourish, and Delilah waited until the other passengers had disembarked before she gathered her courage and stepped down onto the dusty street. Buffalo was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings lining a wide main street that seemed to stretch endlessly under the vast Wyoming sky. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing, and for a moment the sheer scope of the landscape made her feel even smaller than usual. "Miss Garrett." A voice spoke behind her, and Delilah spun around so quickly she nearly dropped her bag. Her heart leapt into her throat as she found herself facing a tall man with graying hair and a weathered face. He held his hat in his hands, twisting it nervously. "I'm Howard Mills. We've been corresponding." Delilah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She took an involuntary step backward, her eyes wide with fear as she catalogued everything about him that could pose a threat. He was bigger than her, stronger, and his hands looked rough and capable of terrible things. The rational part of her mind knew she was being unfair, that this man had shown her nothing but kindness in his letters, but fear was not rational. "I know this must be mighty strange for you," Howard said gently, not moving any closer. "Coming all this way to meet someone you've never laid eyes on. I appreciate your courage in answering my advertisement." Courage. The word almost made her laugh, but she swallowed the sound before it could escape. There was no courage in running away from one nightmare into the arms of potential disaster. There was only survival, and she had learned to be very good at surviving. "I have a room prepared for you at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house," Howard continued when she remained silent. "I thought you might want some time to settle in before we discuss the arrangements. There's no rush, Miss Garrett. We can take things as slow as you need." Delilah nodded jerkily, still clutching her bag. She managed to force out a whispered, "Thank you." They walked through town in uncomfortable silence, Howard keeping a respectful distance that Delilah appreciated more than he could know. She noticed the way people watched them, curious eyes following the mail-order bride and her prospective husband. The attention made her skin crawl, but she kept her head down and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a neat 2-story building with white curtains in the windows and a small garden out front. The proprietress herself answered the door, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron. "You must be Miss Garrett. Welcome to Buffalo, dear. I have your room all ready." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. It was the nicest room Delilah had occupied in years, and she felt something tighten in her chest at the simple kindness of fresh flowers in a jar on the windowsill. "I'll leave you to rest," Howard said from the doorway, careful not to enter the room. "Perhaps we could meet for supper tomorrow at the restaurant down the street. We could talk about things, get to know each other a bit." Delilah nodded again, her throat too tight for words. Howard gave her a small smile and left, and she listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway before she finally allowed herself to sink onto the bed. Her whole body was shaking now that she was alone, and she wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly as she tried to calm the storm of panic inside her. She had nowhere else to go. Philadelphia held nothing for her but bad memories and worse possibilities. Her father had been a violent drunk who had beaten her mother until the woman's spirit broke along with her body. Delilah had been 14 when her mother died, leaving her alone with a man whose rage only grew worse without his primary target. She had endured 3 more years before escaping to work as a seamstress, living in a cramped room with 3 other girls and barely earning enough to eat. Then she had made the mistake of catching the attention of the factory owner's son, a man who thought her fear made her easy prey. She shuddered at the memory of his hands grabbing her, his breath hot and sour against her face. She had fought him off that time, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he cornered her again. That was when she had seen Howard Mills's advertisement in the newspaper, seeking a wife to help him run his ranch outside Buffalo. He had seemed decent in his letters, but she had learned that men could hide monsters behind pleasant words. That night, Delilah barely slept, starting awake at every creak of the floorboards and every distant sound from the street. When dawn finally broke, she rose and washed her face with cold water from the pitcher, then braided her hair with mechanical precision. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a young woman of 20 who looked both older and younger than her years, fear and experience aging her eyes while her face remained almost childishly soft. She spent the day in her room, too afraid to venture out into the unfamiliar town. Mrs. Henderson brought her meals, chattering cheerfully about Buffalo and its residents while Delilah picked at her food and nodded at appropriate intervals. The older woman seemed to understand that something was wrong, but she did not press, for which Delilah was grateful. When evening came and it was time to meet Howard for supper, Delilah changed into her other dress, a faded blue calico that had been mended so many times the stitching created patterns across the fabric. Her hands shook as she tried to fasten the buttons, and it took her 3 attempts before she managed to complete the task. The restaurant was busy, filled with cowboys and townspeople enjoying their evening meals. The noise and crowd made Delilah's chest tighten, but she spotted Howard at a corner table and forced herself to walk toward him. He stood when he saw her, pulling out her chair before she could protest the courtesy. "You look lovely," he said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice even as her mind automatically rejected the compliment. No one had called her lovely since she was a child, before the world had taught her what men really wanted from women. They ordered food, and Howard tried making conversation, asking about her journey and her impressions of Buffalo. Delilah answered in monosyllables, her eyes darting around the room, cataloging exits and potential threats. She noticed that Howard never reached across the table, never invaded her space, always kept his voice low and gentle. "Miss Garrett," he said finally, setting down his fork. "I can see that something has frightened you terribly. I want you to know that I'm a patient man, and I would never force you into anything you're not comfortable with. If you need time, we have time. If you decide you don't want to go through with the marriage, I'll pay for your passage back to Philadelphia, no questions asked." The offer surprised her so much that she actually looked directly at him for the first time. His eyes were brown and tired, but there was no cruelty in them, no hidden malice that she could detect. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because everyone deserves kindness," he said simply. "And because I can see you've had precious little of it in your life." Something inside Delilah cracked at those words, but she could not let herself break, not here in public. She nodded stiffly and returned her attention to her barely touched meal. They finished eating in silence, and Howard walked her back to the boarding house, maintaining that careful distance that she both appreciated and found confusing. Men in her experience took what they wanted without asking. Howard's restraint made her suspicious, even as it provided relief. The next morning, Mrs. Henderson knocked on her door with unexpected news. "Howard Mills sent a message, dear. He's been called away on urgent business. His foreman's coming by with a note for you." Delilah's stomach dropped. A foreman. Another strange man. She considered refusing to go downstairs, but curiosity and something else, something that might have been disappointment, drove her to smooth her dress and descend to the parlor. The man waiting there took her breath away for entirely different reasons than fear. He was younger than Howard, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes so blue they reminded her of the summer sky she had glimpsed through the stage coach window. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn denims and a dusty shirt, a hat held respectfully in his hands. When he saw her, his expression softened with what looked like concern. "Miss Garrett." His voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had grown up in the territories. "I'm Ethan Lancaster, foreman of the Mills Ranch. Howard asked me to deliver this to you and to let you know he'll be back in about a week." He held out a sealed envelope, but did not step closer, clearly noting how she had frozen at the top of the stairs. With effort, Delilah forced herself to descend and cross the parlor, snatching the letter from his hand and retreating quickly. She did not miss the flash of pain in Ethan Lancaster's eyes at her reaction, but she could not help herself. "Thank you," she managed to say, the words barely audible. "Miss Garrett," Ethan said carefully, "Howard mentioned that you might feel uncomfortable in town with him away. I want you to know that you're safe here. Mrs. Henderson's a good woman, and if you need anything at all, you can send word to the ranch. I'll come right away." Delilah stared at him, trying to understand what kind of trick this was. Men did not offer help without expecting something in return. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Ethan's expression grew even gentler, and somehow that made him more dangerous. "Because it's the right thing to do, madam. You're far from home and alone in a strange place. That can't be easy." He settled his hat back on his head and gave her a small nod before leaving. Delilah stood in the parlor long after the door closed behind him, staring at the envelope in her hands. Finally, she retreated to her room and broke the seal with trembling fingers. Howard's letter was brief and apologetic. His sister in Cheyenne had taken ill, and he needed to go help her family for a short while. He assured Delilah that her room at the boarding house was paid for, and that she should not worry about expenses. He also mentioned that Ethan Lancaster was completely trustworthy and could be called upon if she needed anything. Delilah set the letter aside and moved to the window, staring out at the dusty street below. A week. She had a week before Howard returned, and she would have to make a decision about her future. The thought of marrying him did not fill her with dread exactly, but neither did it bring any sense of hope. He seemed kind, but kindness could be a mask. She had learned that lesson too well. The days passed slowly. Delilah rarely left her room, and when she did venture downstairs for meals, she ate quickly and retreated. Mrs. Henderson tried engaging her in conversation, but Delilah could not bring herself to relax, even in the company of a woman. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. On the third day, she was sitting by her window watching the street when she saw Ethan Lancaster ride into town. He was mounted on a beautiful chestnut horse, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. He dismounted in front of the general store and disappeared inside, emerging a few minutes later with a small package. To Delilah's shock, he crossed the street and entered the boarding house. She heard his boots on the stairs and then a soft knock at her door. Every muscle in her body tensed as she debated ignoring it, but something made her cross to the door and open it just a crack, keeping the chain engaged. Ethan stood in the hallway, holding the package. "Miss Garrett, I apologize for disturbing you. Mrs. Henderson mentioned you've been keeping to your room, and I thought you might like something to read. There's not much selection at the general store, but I picked up what they had." He held out the package, and Delilah stared at it as if it might bite her. "I do not have money for books," she said quietly. "No charge, madam. Consider it a welcome to Buffalo." When she did not immediately take the package, Ethan set it carefully on the floor just outside her door. "I'll be heading back to the ranch now. You take care, Miss Garrett." He turned and walked away before she could respond. Delilah waited until she heard the front door close before she unchained her door and retrieved the package. Inside were 3 books, slightly worn but readable, along with a small bag of lemon drops. A note in neat handwriting read, "Mrs. Henderson mentioned these were your favorite. Ethan Lancaster." Delilah sank onto her bed, clutching the books and candy to her chest. She had not told Mrs. Henderson about lemon drops. She had simply mentioned in passing during one meal that her mother used to save pennies to buy them as treats when Delilah was small, back before everything went wrong. The fact that the landlady had remembered and shared that information with Ethan, and that he had cared enough to act on it, created a confusing swirl of emotions in Delilah's chest. She spent the next 2 days reading, losing herself in stories of adventure and romance that seemed impossibly distant from her own life. The lemon drops lasted longer because she rationed them carefully, allowing herself one each evening as a reward for surviving another day in this strange place. On the 5th day, Delilah woke to raised voices outside. She rushed to the window and saw a group of rough-looking men on horseback causing a commotion in the street. They were clearly drunk despite the early hour, firing pistols into the air and laughing as people scattered. Delilah's heart raced as she watched one of them grab a woman who had been crossing the street, pulling her toward him while she struggled. Without thinking, Delilah ran downstairs. Mrs. Henderson was at the front door, her face pale with worry. "Those Carter boys," she muttered. "Always causing trouble when they come to town. Someone needs to teach them manners." As if summoned by the words, Ethan Lancaster rode into view, his horse moving fast down the main street. He reined in sharply next to the group, and Delilah watched as he dismounted in one fluid motion and strode directly toward the man holding the woman. "Let her go, Jake." Ethan's voice carried clearly even through the closed window. "You and your brothers need to move along." "Or what, Lancaster?" The man called Jake sneered. "You gonna stop all of us, if I have to." Ethan's stance was relaxed but ready, and there was something in his bearing that made even the drunk cowboys pause. "This is your only warning. Let the lady go and ride out, or Sheriff Walsh will be having words with your father about your behavior." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Jake shoved the woman away roughly, and she stumbled before being caught by another bystander. "This ain't over, Lancaster," Jake spat before wheeling his horse around. His brothers followed, and the group thundered out of town, still firing shots into the air. Ethan helped the shaken woman to her feet, speaking to her quietly until she nodded and hurried away. Then he looked up and his eyes met Delilah's through the window. She gasped and stepped back, but not before she saw him tip his hat to her. Her heart was pounding, but not entirely from fear. She had just watched Ethan Lancaster face down 5 armed men without hesitation, protecting someone weaker without thought for his own safety. The cowboys on the ranch spoke of him with respect. She had heard them when they passed by the boarding house. Howard trusted him completely. And he had been nothing but courteous and thoughtful toward her, even when she had given him no reason to be. That evening, Delilah did something she had not done since arriving in Buffalo. She left the boarding house and walked down to the small church at the end of the street. It was empty and quiet, the late afternoon sun streaming through the simple windows and painting patterns on the wooden pews. She sat down in the back row and closed her eyes, trying to sort through the tangle of fear and confusion and something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I do not know what to do," she whispered to the silence. "I am so afraid all the time, but I cannot keep running forever." No divine voice answered, but in the quiet of the church, Delilah felt something inside her shift. She had survived her father's rage and her mother's death. She had survived poverty and the predatory attention of men who saw her as prey. She had survived the terrifying journey west to an uncertain future. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could survive learning to trust again. When she returned to the boarding house, she sat down with paper and pen that Mrs. Henderson loaned her and wrote a short note. Her handwriting was careful and neat, a legacy of the few years of schooling she had managed before her father pulled her out to work. "Mr. Lancaster, thank you for the books and the candy. Your kindness is appreciated. Also, thank you for helping that woman today. It was brave. Delilah Garrett." She sealed the note and asked Mrs. Henderson to have it delivered to the ranch. Then she returned to her room and tried not to think about why Ethan Lancaster's smile had made her feel warm for the first time in years. Howard returned to Buffalo a week after he had left, looking tired but relieved. His sister was recovering, and he was eager to resume courting Delilah, though he remained as patient and careful as before. They had dinner again at the restaurant, and this time Delilah managed to speak a bit more, answering his questions about her life in Philadelphia in carefully edited versions that left out the worst parts. "I need to be honest with you, Miss Garrett," Howard said over dessert. "I'm not looking for a wife in the romantic sense. I had that once, years ago, and when she died, she took that part of my heart with her. What I need is a partner, someone to help run the ranch and keep house, someone I can respect and treat well. I know that's not what most young women dream of, but I thought you should know the truth before you decide." Delilah absorbed this information with a strange sense of relief. A marriage of convenience, a business arrangement, that she could understand, that felt safer than the alternative. "And you would expect nothing else from me?" she asked carefully. Howard met her eyes steadily. "I would expect respect and honest work, nothing more. You would have your own room, your own space. I promise you that, Miss Garrett." It was more than she could have hoped for, and yet Delilah found herself hesitating. "Could I see the ranch before I decide?" she asked. "I would like to know what I would be agreeing to." "Of course," Howard said. "I'll arrange for the wagon to bring you out tomorrow if you like. Ethan can drive you, and I'll give you a tour of the place." The mention of Ethan made Delilah's pulse quicken, though she told herself it was just nerves. She agreed to the plan and spent a restless night wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the Wyoming sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Ethan arrived with a wagon just after breakfast, and Delilah climbed aboard with Mrs. Henderson's help, clutching her shawl around her shoulders despite the warm day. "It's about an hour's ride," Ethan said as he set the horses into motion. "The ranch is northeast of town, up against the foothills. Pretty country out there." They rode in silence for a while, Delilah acutely aware of Ethan's presence beside her on the wagon seat. He did not try to make conversation, seeming content to let her be, and she was grateful for that even as part of her wanted to hear his voice. "Miss Garrett," he said finally, "I got your note. You are very welcome for the books, and there was no bravery involved yesterday. Those Carter boys are all bluster and no spine. You stood up to 5 armed men," Delilah said quietly. "That seems brave to me." Ethan glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face as if he had not expected her to engage. "Someone had to. Can't have folks thinking they can terrorize decent people without consequences. Where did you learn to do that?" The question surprised Delilah as much as it seemed to surprise Ethan. "To face danger like it does not frighten you. Who says it doesn't frighten me?" Ethan's smile was wry. "I grew up on a ranch south of here, and my father taught me young that fear is natural. It's what you do with the fear that matters. You can let it control you, or you can control it." Delilah absorbed this, turning the words over in her mind. "What if the fear is too big?" she whispered. "What if it feels like it will swallow you whole?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the road ahead. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Then you take it one day at a time, Miss Garrett. 1 hour if that is all you can manage. 1 minute. You keep breathing and putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually you look back and realize you have walked further than you thought possible." Tears stung Delilah's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "You sound like you speak from experience." "My mother died when I was 12, Ethan said quietly. "Fever took her in 3 days. My father fell into a bottle and never climbed back out. I ran the ranch by myself for 2 years before he drank himself to death, and then I had to sell it to pay his debts. I was 14 and alone in the world, convinced I would not survive the winter." "But you did," Delilah said. "But I did. Howard gave me work when I showed up here half-starved and desperate. He taught me about ranching, about being a man, about honor and integrity. He saved my life, Miss Garrett, and I have spent the last 12 years trying to repay that debt." Delilah looked at Ethan with new eyes, seeing past the capable cowboy to the boy who had survived impossible circumstances. 12 years. So you were 14 when you came here?" "Yes, madam. I am 26 now, and I can honestly say that I owe everything good in my life to Howard Mills and this ranch." They crested a rise, and the ranch spread out before them. It was larger than Delilah had expected, with a substantial 2-story house, a big barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle dotted the grassland that stretched toward the mountains, and she could see several cowboys working in the distance. "It is beautiful," she said softly, and meant it. There was something about the vast open space that called to something inside her, something that had been locked away for too long. Howard was waiting on the porch, and he helped Delilah down from the wagon with careful courtesy. He showed her through the house, which was well built but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The kitchen was functional but sparse, the rooms clean but Spartan. Delilah found herself mentally cataloging changes she could make, curtains she could sew, touches that would make the space a home rather than just a house. "The room upstairs at the end of the hall would be yours," Howard said, showing her a sunny bedroom with windows overlooking the ranch. "I stay in the room at the other end. There is plenty of space for both of us to have privacy." Delilah nodded, relief washing through her. She could see herself here, could imagine a life of hard work and simple routines, of safety and distance from the horrors of her past. "It is a good room," she said. "A good house." They returned downstairs, and Howard invited her to sit on the porch while he discussed some business with his ranch hands. Delilah sank into a rocking chair and watched the activity of the ranch, the easy competence of the men as they worked with the horses and cattle. She spotted Ethan among them, his voice carrying as he gave instructions to a younger cowboy who listened with clear respect. She found herself watching Ethan more than she watched anyone else, noting the way he moved, the way he smiled when one of the horses nuzzled his shoulder looking for treats. He pulled an apple from his pocket and offered it to the animal, rubbing its nose affectionately. There was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his strength, and Delilah felt something stir in her chest, something she had thought dead and buried. As if sensing her regard, Ethan looked up and caught her watching. Instead of looking away in embarrassment, she held his gaze for a long moment before nodding slightly in acknowledgement. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners, and Delilah felt her face grow warm as she quickly looked away. The ride back to town was quieter than the journey out. Delilah was lost in thought, weighing her options and possibilities. Marriage to Howard would be safe, secure, everything she needed to rebuild her life. But as she sat next to Ethan on the wagon seat, achingly aware of every shift of his body and every breath he took, she realized that safety might come at a cost she had not anticipated. How could she marry Howard while feeling this strange pull toward his foreman? "You are thinking very hard, Miss Garrett," Ethan observed as they approached Buffalo. "I hope the ranch did not disappoint." "No," Delilah said truthfully, "it is lovely. Howard has built something good there." "He has," Ethan agreed, "and he is a good man." "You could do a lot worse, if you are considering his proposal." There was something in his tone that made Delilah look at him sharply, but his face was carefully neutral. "You think I should accept?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I think you should do what feels right for you, Miss Garrett. I think you have been hurt badly by someone, maybe more than one someone, and I think you deserve a chance at peace and safety. If Howard can give you that, then yes, you should accept. And if I want more than just peace and safety—" The words escaped before Delilah could stop them, and she immediately regretted her boldness. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins, and she saw a muscle jump in his jaw. "Then you should hold out for more," he said quietly. "You should hold out for everything you deserve, Miss Garrett. Never settle for less than that." They did not speak again until the wagon pulled up in front of the boarding house. Ethan helped her down, his hands strong and steady on her waist, and for just a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Her breath caught, and she saw his pupils dilate as he looked down at her. "Miss Garrett," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "I will not get in the way of your happiness with Howard. He deserves good things, and so do you. But I want you to know that if circumstances were different, if things were not so complicated, I would be courting you myself. I have never met anyone like you, and I doubt I ever will again." Delilah's heart was racing so fast she thought she might faint. "Mr. Lancaster, I do not understand what you are saying." "I am saying that I care about you," Ethan said, his eyes intense on hers. "I know that is not fair, and I know I have no right to such feelings, but I will not lie to you or hide the truth. However, I also will not act on these feelings. Howard is the best man I know, and I will not betray him or make things difficult for you. I just wanted you to know that you are seen, Delilah Garrett. You are valued. And you are worthy of love, real love, not just safety and security." With that, he released her and stepped back, tipping his hat. "I should be getting back to the ranch. You have a good evening, Miss Garrett." He climbed back onto the wagon and drove away, leaving Delilah standing on the boardwalk with her mind spinning and her heart in chaos. She had come west looking for safety, for an escape from fear and pain. She had not expected to find a man who looked at her like she was something precious, who spoke to her with respect and kindness, who made her feel things she had convinced herself she would never feel. That night, Delilah paced her small room until well after midnight, wrestling with impossible decisions. The sensible choice was to accept Howard's proposal. He offered security, respect, and a clear agreement with boundaries she could understand and navigate. The marriage would be convenient for both of them, with no messy emotions to complicate things. But Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "You are worthy of love, real love." Was she? Could she ever overcome her fear enough to let someone close, to risk the vulnerability that real love required? And even if she could, was it fair to anyone involved to pursue feelings for Ethan when Howard had brought her here, had paid her way, had offered her a chance at a new life? The next morning, Howard called on her at the boarding house. He seemed nervous, twisting his hat in his hands the way he had when they first met. "Miss Garrett, I do not want to rush you, but I need to know your decision. If you are not comfortable with the arrangement I proposed, I understand completely. I will still pay your passage back to Philadelphia or anywhere else you might want to go." Delilah took a deep breath. She thought about Philadelphia and all the reasons she had fled. She thought about the ranch and the life she could build there. She thought about Howard's kindness and his honesty about what he could offer. And she thought about Ethan, about the way he made her feel alive and terrified in equal measure. "I will accept your proposal, Mr. Mills," she heard herself say, "but I have a request." "Anything," Howard said, relief clear in his voice. "I need time," Delilah said. "Time to adjust, to learn about the ranch and my duties, to feel safe. Can we be engaged for a while before the actual wedding? A few months, perhaps?" Howard's smile was warm and understanding. "Of course, Miss Garrett. We will take as long as you need. And please call me Howard. We are going to be partners after all." They shook hands formally, sealing the agreement, and Howard left to make arrangements for Delilah to move to the ranch. She should have felt relieved, secure in the knowledge that her future was settled. Instead, she felt hollow, as if she had just closed a door on something important that she could not quite name. Word spread quickly through Buffalo that Howard Mills had acquired a bride. Mrs. Henderson was delighted, fussing over Delilah and helping her pack her meager belongings. The other residents of the boarding house offered congratulations, and the women of the town began stopping by to welcome her and offer advice about ranch life. Through it all, Delilah smiled and nodded and tried to ignore the growing ache in her chest. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew Ethan Lancaster, that what she felt was probably just gratitude mixed with the novelty of male attention that did not come with threat attached. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The day came when Howard arrived with the wagon to take her to the ranch. Delilah said goodbye to Mrs. Henderson, who hugged her tightly and whispered, "You are always welcome here if you need a friend, dear girl." The ranch looked different knowing she would be living there. Howard showed her to her room and gave her space to settle in, then introduced her to Rosa, the Mexican woman who came 3 times a week to help with heavy cleaning and laundry. Rosa was warm and maternal, immediately taking Delilah under her wing and chattering in a mix of Spanish and English about how wonderful it was to have another woman on the ranch. Delilah fell into a routine over the following days. She rose early to prepare breakfast for Howard and whatever hands were eating at the house. She cleaned and organized, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the neglected corners of the house. She learned to cook on the big iron stove, producing meals that were simple but hearty. In the evenings, she sat on the porch and sewed, making curtains and dish towels and tablecloths from fabric Howard had purchased for her in town. It was a good life, she told herself. Peaceful and safe, exactly what she had wanted. But her eyes constantly sought Ethan among the ranch hands, and her heart leapt whenever she heard his voice. He was unfailingly polite, calling her Miss Garrett and keeping his distance, but sometimes she would look up and find him watching her with an expression that made her stomach flip. 3 weeks after she arrived at the ranch, a late spring storm rolled in with little warning. Delilah was hanging laundry when the sky suddenly darkened and the wind picked up, sending sheets whipping wildly on the line. She struggled to gather the clothes before they blew away, but the wind was too strong. Suddenly Ethan was there, reaching over her head to unhook a sheet. "Get inside, Miss Garrett. This storm is going to be bad." Thunder cracked overhead, making Delilah jump. Rain began pouring down in sheets, soaking them both instantly. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the house, his grip strong but not painful. They burst through the door just as lightning split the sky, illuminating the kitchen in harsh white light. Delilah was shaking, but not entirely from cold. Ethan's hand was still wrapped around hers, warm and calloused and somehow right. She looked up at him and found him staring down at her, water dripping from his hair and running down his face. The air between them felt charged, electric like the storm raging outside. "Delilah," he said, her name rough on his tongue. It was the first time he had used her given name. "I am trying so hard to keep my distance, to do the right thing, but you make it very difficult." "I did not ask you to keep your distance," Delilah whispered, surprised by her own boldness. "I did not ask for any of this." "I know," Ethan said, "and that is what makes it so hard. You deserve better than a foreman with nothing to his name and a past full of loss. Howard can give you security, safety. I can only offer uncertainty and complications. What if I do not want safe anymore?" Delilah's voice was trembling but determined. "What if I want to feel alive?" Ethan made a sound low in his throat, and his free hand came up to cup her cheek. His touch was gentle, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she leaned into his palm, her eyes drifting closed at the simple pleasure of affectionate contact. "If you want that," Ethan said quietly, "then we need to talk to Howard. I will not do this behind his back. He deserves honesty from both of us." The mention of Howard was like cold water breaking the spell. Delilah stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I do not know if I can," she admitted. "He has been so kind to me, and I agreed to marry him." "What kind of person would I be to go back on my word?" "The kind of person who deserves to make her own choices," Ethan said. "The kind of person who is brave enough to choose happiness instead of just safety." "I do not feel brave," Delilah said, tears mixing with the rain water on her face. "I am afraid all the time, Ethan. I'm afraid of Howard even though he has never given me reason to be. I'm afraid of you because you make me feel things I thought I would never feel again. I'm afraid that if I reach for what I want, it will turn to ashes in my hands." Ethan's expression was full of pain and understanding. "I know something about fear, Delilah. I know what it is like to lose everything and have to build yourself back up from nothing. But I also know that living in fear is not really living at all. And I think you know that too, or you never would have gotten on that stagecoach in Philadelphia." He was right, and Delilah knew it. She had survived too much to spend the rest of her life merely existing, hiding from feeling anything real because feeling meant risk. "What do I do?" She asked helplessly. "You tell Howard the truth," Ethan said. "You tell him that you care for me and that you cannot in good conscience marry him while your heart belongs to someone else. And then you let me court you properly, the way you deserve to be courted. And if it does not work, if my fear is too much, if I cannot be what you need," Ethan smiled sadly, "then at least we will know we tried. But Delilah, I need you to understand something. I am a patient man. I will wait as long as it takes for you to learn to trust me. I will earn that trust one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. I will prove to you that not all men are like whoever hurt you. I will show you that you are safe with me in every way that matters." Delilah's heart felt too big for her chest. "You would do that? Wait for me, even knowing I might never be able to give you what you want?" "I would wait forever if that is what it took," Ethan said simply. "Because you are worth waiting for, Delilah Garrett." The storm raged outside while Delilah wrestled with the biggest decision of her life. Finally, she took a shaky breath and nodded. "I will talk to Howard tonight when he comes in from securing the livestock, but you should be there too. You said we owe him honesty, and that means both of us being honest together." Ethan agreed, and they spent the rest of the afternoon in awkward silence, both changing into dry clothes and trying not to think about what was coming. When Howard finally came in from the storm, soaked and tired, he found them both waiting in the parlor. He took one look at their faces and sank into a chair. "I see," he said quietly. "I suppose I should have seen this coming." "Howard, I am so sorry," Delilah began, her voice shaking. "You have been nothing but kind to me, and I have no right to ask for anything more than what you have already given. But I cannot marry you while my heart belongs to someone else. It would not be fair to either of us." Howard was quiet for a long moment, studying both of them. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "Delilah, I am not blind. I have seen the way you two look at each other, and I am not so selfish that I would stand in the way of real happiness when all I could offer was comfortable companionship. You are not angry?" Delilah asked, hardly daring to believe it could be this simple. "Disappointed, perhaps, because you would have made an excellent partner and I had grown fond of the idea of having someone to share this place with. But angry? No. I want you both to be happy, and it is clear that you make each other happy." Howard turned to Ethan. "That said, I expect you to treat her well. If I hear that you have hurt her or given her any reason to fear you, we are going to have words." "I would expect nothing less," Ethan said solemnly. "And I give you my word that I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of her trust." Howard stood and extended his hand to Ethan, who shook it firmly. Then Howard turned to Delilah and took her hand gently. "You are always welcome here, my dear. This is your home for as long as you need it. And if you decide you want to stay after you and Ethan work things out, well, I suppose we can make that arrangement too." Relief and gratitude washed over Delilah in waves. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding, for being kind even when you did not have to be." "Kindness costs nothing," Howard said. "And it seems to me that you have had too little of it in your life. I am glad that is changing." He excused himself to change into dry clothes, leaving Delilah and Ethan alone. They looked at each other, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. "So," Ethan said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "May I court you, Miss Delilah Garrett?" "You may," Delilah said, her own lips twitching into a tentative smile. "But you should know that I am damaged goods, Mr. Ethan Lancaster. I have scars and fears, and I cannot promise that I will be easy to love." "Good thing I am not looking for easy," Ethan said. "I am looking for real and true and worth fighting for, and that is exactly what you are, Delilah." True to his word, Ethan began courting Delilah with a patience and tenderness that gradually chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. He started small, with simple gestures that did not require her to be vulnerable. He would leave wildflowers on the kitchen table in the morning, blooms he had picked during his early ride to check the fences. He would ask her opinion on ranch matters, valuing her thoughts and ideas. He taught her to ride, spending hours helping her overcome her fear of the large horses until she could mount and ride on her own. The first time Delilah laughed, really laughed at something Ethan said, they both froze in surprise. The sound was rusty and unpracticed, but genuine, and Ethan's face lit up like she had given him the most precious gift in the world. "Do that again," he said softly. "Do what?" Laugh. Smile. Let yourself be happy, even if just for a moment. Delilah felt self-conscious, but she tried, thinking of the joke he had just told about one of the ranch hands and a stubborn calf. The laugh came more easily this time, and she saw Ethan's eyes grow suspiciously bright. "That is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard," he said. Summer arrived in full force, turning the Wyoming grasslands golden and the sky impossibly blue. Delilah continued her work around the ranch, but now she had a companion for evening walks, someone to sit with her on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about his childhood, about his dreams of one day owning his own ranch again. Delilah, in halting words, began sharing pieces of her own past, testing to see if her truth would make him turn away in disgust. It never did. When she told him about her father's violence, Ethan's jaw tightened and his hands clenched, but his voice remained gentle as he thanked her for trusting him with something so painful. When she described the factory owner's son and his unwanted advances, Ethan pulled her into a careful hug, asking permission first and making sure she knew she could push him away at any time. "You survived," he told her. "You are stronger than you know, Delilah. Those experiences do not define you. They are part of your story, but they are not the whole story." Slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, Delilah began to heal. The constant tension in her shoulders eased. She stopped flinching at sudden movements or loud noises. She started sleeping through the night instead of waking at every sound. And through it all, Ethan was there, patient and steady, proving day by day that she was safe with him. The first time Ethan tried to hold her hand, 2 months into their courtship, Delilah panicked and pulled away. She was immediately ashamed, but Ethan just smiled and said, "That is all right. We will try again another time." A week later, she reached for his hand first, threading her fingers through his as they walked along the creek that ran through the ranch property. Ethan's hand closed around hers carefully, and they walked in silence, both of them aware of the significance of such a simple gesture. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. "For what?" "For trusting me. For letting me in, even though I know how hard it is for you." Delilah squeezed his hand. "You make it easier. You do not push. You do not demand. You just wait, and somehow that makes me want to try." Fall brought cooler weather and the roundup, a frantic few weeks when every hand on the ranch worked long hours gathering cattle and preparing them for sale. Delilah found herself cooking for a dozen hungry cowboys, rising before dawn to start breakfast and falling into bed exhausted after cleaning up from dinner. But she did not mind the work. She liked feeling useful, liked being part of something larger than herself. Ethan was busy from sunrise to well past sunset, but he always made time to check on her, to make sure she was not working too hard. One evening, he found her in the kitchen washing an endless stack of dishes and simply rolled up his sleeves and started drying. They worked in comfortable silence, and when the last dish was put away, Ethan helped her out of her apron and led her outside. "You need a break," he said. "You have been working non-stop for 2 weeks." "So have you," Delilah pointed out. "Yes, but I am used to it." "You are not, and I do not want you making yourself sick." He pulled her down to sit beside him on the porch steps, their shoulders touching. "Tell me something. What did you dream about before you came here? What did you want from life?" Delilah was quiet, thinking. "I wanted to feel safe," she said finally. "That was all, just safety and enough food to eat and a place to sleep where I did not have to be afraid. My dreams were very small. And now," she turned to look at him, this man who had somehow become the center of her world. "Now I want more. I want to build something real. I want a home, a family, a future. I want to learn to trust fully instead of always holding part of myself back. I want to be brave enough to love and be loved." Ethan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "You are already brave, Delilah, the bravest person I know, and you are already loved more than you can possibly imagine." "Am I?" The question was barely a whisper. "You are," Ethan said firmly. "I love you, Delilah Garrett. I love your strength and your courage and your determination to survive, even when surviving seemed impossible. I love the way you hum when you think no one is listening, and the way you treat the ranch animals with such gentleness. I love how hard you work and how much you care about doing things right. I love every single thing about you, including the parts you think are broken." Delilah's heart was racing. "I do not know if I can say it back yet. I feel it, but the words stick in my throat because every time I cared about someone, they either hurt me or left me." "Then do not say it until you are ready," Ethan said. "I do not need the words, Delilah. I just need you however you can be with me. Your presence is enough." But Delilah was tired of letting fear control her. She took a shaky breath and forced out the words that terrified her. "I love you too, Ethan Lancaster. I think I have loved you since that day you brought me books and candy, maybe even since the first time I saw you standing in Mrs. Henderson's parlor looking at me like I was someone worth seeing." Ethan's smile was brilliant, joy radiating from him. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "If you are not ready, that is fine, but I would very much like to kiss you, Delilah." Delilah's first instinct was panic, memories of rough grabbing hands and forced kisses making her want to flee. But this was Ethan, who had never pushed her, who had waited months for her to trust him. She nodded jerkily. "Yes, but please go slow." "As slow as you need," Ethan promised. He leaned in gradually, giving her every opportunity to change her mind or pull away. When his lips finally touched hers, the kiss was soft and sweet, questioning rather than demanding. Delilah's eyes drifted closed as she leaned into the kiss, discovering that affection did not have to hurt, that desire did not have to be frightening. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "That was my first real kiss," Delilah admitted. "Everything before was stolen or forced." Ethan's expression darkened momentarily, but he controlled it. "Then I am honored to give you a first that was freely given and gently received. And I promise you, Delilah, every kiss from now on will be the same. You will always have a choice with me." They sat on the porch steps for hours, talking and kissing and simply being together. When Delilah finally went to bed that night, she fell asleep with a smile on her face, and for the first time in her life, dreams of a future that did not terrify her. The roundup finished successfully, and Howard took several hands to Cheyenne to sell the cattle while Ethan stayed behind to manage the ranch. With fewer people around, the place felt quieter, more intimate. Delilah and Ethan fell into new patterns, eating meals together and spending their evenings on the porch or walking the ranch property as Ethan taught her about the land and the cattle. One cool October afternoon, Ethan surprised her by saddling 2 horses and packing a picnic lunch. "I want to show you something," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. They rode for about an hour, climbing into the foothills until they reached a high meadow with a view that seemed to stretch forever. The grass was golden with fall, and aspen trees ringed the clearing, their leaves brilliant yellow against the deep blue sky. A small stream ran through one corner, and Delilah could see deer tracks in the soft earth near the water. "This is beautiful," she breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It is for sale," Ethan said, dismounting and helping her down. 160 acres, including this meadow and the stream and the timber rights to those aspen groves. The owner is moving back east and wants to sell quickly. Delilah looked at him, understanding dawning. "You want to buy it, you want to start your own ranch." "I want to build a future," Ethan said. "I have been saving every penny I could for 12 years, and I finally have enough for the down payment. It would take years of hard work to build it into something profitable, but it is possible. It is my dream, Delilah." "It is a good dream," Delilah said softly. Ethan took both her hands in his expression serious. "I want it to be our dream. Delilah Garrett, will you marry me? Will you help me build something here, something that belongs to both of us? I cannot promise you an easy life or wealth or luxury. But I can promise you honesty and respect and love that will last as long as I am breathing. I can promise you a partner who will work beside you and value your contributions. And I can promise you that you will always, always be safe with me." Tears were streaming down Delilah's face, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan. I will help you build our dream." Ethan whooped and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Delilah kissed him back with growing confidence, no longer afraid of her own feelings or his. They spent the afternoon in that meadow, making plans and dreaming out loud. Ethan described the house he wanted to build, something simple but well made, with a big kitchen for Delilah and a porch for watching the sunrise. Delilah talked about gardens and maybe chickens, about curtains for the windows and quilts for the beds. They planned where the barn should go, where to build corrals, how to gradually increase their herd. "We should get married before winter," Ethan said as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. "That way we can spend the cold months planning and preparing and start building as soon as the ground thaws in spring." "That soon?" Delilah felt a flutter of nerves but also excitement. "What about Howard? He has been so good to us. I do not want to leave him without help." "We will talk to him," Ethan said. "He has been encouraging me to buy land of my own for years. I think he will be happy for us, maybe even relieved to have his house back to himself." When they returned to the ranch that evening, they found Howard had returned from Cheyenne. He took one look at their faces and smiled. "I see congratulations are in order." "How did you know?" Delilah asked. "You are both glowing like lanterns," Howard said, "and Ethan has been planning to propose for weeks. He asked my permission, which I appreciated even though you are certainly old enough to make your own decisions." They told him about the land and their plans to marry and start their own ranch. Howard listened carefully, then nodded his approval. "I will be sorry to lose my foreman, but I am happy for both of you. You deserve this, Ethan. You have earned it through years of hard work and dedication. And Delilah, you have brought life back to this ranch. I will miss having you here, but I will be glad to have neighbors." "We will only be an hour away," Ethan pointed out, "and I will help you find and train a new foreman before we leave." "I would appreciate that," Howard said. "Now let us celebrate. I brought back a bottle of good whiskey from Cheyenne, and I think this occasion calls for it." They spent the evening talking and planning, Howard offering advice about ranching and construction, and the 100 details involved in starting from nothing. Delilah listened and contributed ideas. feeling more and more like a full partner in the enterprise rather than just a woman following a man's dream. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan completed the purchase of the land, signing papers that made him a landowner for the first time since he was 14. Delilah and Mrs. Henderson planned a small wedding to be held at the church in Buffalo. Word spread through the community, and people who Delilah barely knew offered help and advice and wedding gifts. Delilah sewed herself a new dress for the wedding, pale blue calico, with lace at the collar that one of the town women had given her. It was the nicest dress she had ever owned, and when she tried it on, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Her face had filled out from regular meals, and her eyes no longer held the haunted look that had defined her for so long. She looked healthy and happy and hopeful, and the transformation brought tears to her eyes. The night before the wedding, Rosa and Mrs. Henderson hosted a small party for Delilah at the boarding house. The women of Buffalo came with gifts and advice, some of it practical and some of it making Delilah blush. They seemed to have accepted her as one of their own, and the warmth of female friendship was something she had not experienced since childhood. "You have done well for yourself, dear Mrs. Henderson said as she helped Delilah pack her few belongings. "Ethan Lancaster is a good man, and you will have a good life together." "I hope so," Delilah said. "I never thought I could feel this way. I spent so long just trying to survive that I forgot to think about actually living." "And now you are going to do more than live," Rosa said, patting her hand. "You are going to thrive, Chica. I see it in your eyes. You are strong like the mountains." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the first week of November bringing frost that sparkled on the grass like diamonds. Delilah dressed carefully with the help of her friends, her hands steady despite her nerves. She was not afraid, she realized with some surprise. She was excited, eager to start this new chapter with Ethan. The church was full when she arrived, the whole community turning out to witness the wedding. Delilah walked down the aisle alone, having no father or family to give her away, but she held her head high. She was giving herself away, making her own choice, and there was power in that. Ethan waited at the altar in a new suit, his eyes locked on her from the moment she entered. The love and pride in his expression made her breath catch, and she found herself smiling as she took his offered hand. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When the minister pronounced them married, Ethan kissed her gently, and the congregation applauded. The reception was held at the town hall, with food donated by half the women in Buffalo and music provided by a fiddler and his son on guitar. Delilah found herself swept into dances and conversations, overwhelmed by the genuine warmth people showed. These were her neighbors now, her community, and they were welcoming her home. Ethan barely left her side all evening, his hand at her elbow or wrapped around hers, as if he could not quite believe she was real and his. When they finally left, pelted with rice and good wishes, they rode out to the ranch house on Howard's land where they would stay for the winter while preparing to move to their own property in the spring. Howard had tactfully made himself scarce, staying in town to give them privacy. Delilah and Ethan entered the quiet house, suddenly shy with each other now that they were alone and married. "Are you afraid?" Ethan asked softly, taking her hands. Delilah considered the question honestly. "A little," she admitted, "but not of you, never of you. I am afraid of not knowing what to do, of disappointing you." "You could never disappoint me," Ethan said. "And we will figure things out together at whatever pace feels right. There is no rush, Delilah. We have the rest of our lives." They took things slowly that night, learning each other with patience and tenderness. Ethan kept his promise, never pushing, always asking, making sure Delilah knew she was safe and cherished. And Delilah discovered that intimacy did not have to be frightening, that it could be beautiful and connecting when shared with someone you trusted completely. Afterward, lying in Ethan's arms as he slept, Delilah marveled at how far she had come. 6 months ago, she had been terrified of all men, convinced that violence and pain were all she could expect from life. Now she was married to a good man who loved her, about to start building a ranch and a future that belonged to both of them. She had faced her fears and found something better on the other side, something she had never dared dream was possible. Winter settled over Wyoming with snow and cold winds, but inside the ranch house, Delilah and Ethan were warm and happy. They spent the short days planning their new ranch, drawing sketches of buildings and corrals, calculating costs and timelines. They spent the long evenings reading together by the fire, talking, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. Ethan taught Delilah how to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a target at 20 paces. "You should know how to protect yourself and your home," he said, "especially when I am out working and you are alone." Delilah appreciated his respect for her capability and independence. He did not coddle her or treat her as fragile, even though he knew her history. Instead, he treated her as an equal partner, valuing her input on ranch decisions and encouraging her to develop skills that would make her confident and self-reliant. As Christmas approached, Delilah decided to make something special for Ethan. She spent weeks secretly sewing a quilt, piecing together fabric scraps into a pattern of stars. It was not perfect, her stitching sometimes uneven, but it was made with love, and she hoped he would see that. On Christmas morning, they exchanged gifts by the fire. Ethan had made her a beautiful wooden jewelry box, sanded smooth and polished until it glowed. Inside was a simple gold locket, and when she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of the two of them that had been taken in town. "I know you do not have family photographs," Ethan said quietly. "I thought maybe we could start creating new memories, new family." Delilah's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. Then she gave him the quilt, watching nervously as he unfolded it and examined her work. "Delilah, this is beautiful," he said, genuine wonder in his voice. "You made this. I wanted you to have something that would keep you warm, something made with love." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love it. I love you. You have given me everything I never knew I needed." After Christmas, they began making concrete preparations for the move to their own land. Ethan hired workers to begin clearing the building site and cutting timber for the house frame. He purchased lumber from the mill in Buffalo and bought glass for windows, nails, and all the supplies they would need. Delilah threw herself into preparations as well, preserving food and making household items they would need. She sewed sheets and pillowcases, dish towels and curtains. She ordered seeds from a catalog for the garden she planned to plant in spring. Every task brought them closer to their dream, and she worked with joy instead of fear driving her. In February, Delilah realized she had not had her monthly bleeding in some time. She told Rosa first, swearing her to secrecy until she could be sure. "Oh, Chica, this is wonderful news," Rosa exclaimed, hugging her. "Have you told Ethan?" "Not yet. I want to be certain first." But as the weeks passed and her body began to change in small but unmistakable ways, Delilah knew. She was carrying Ethan's child, a new life growing inside her. The knowledge filled her with equal parts joy and terror. How could she raise a child when her own childhood had been so damaged? What if she passed her fears and scars on to an innocent baby? She finally told Ethan one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting on her stomach as they talked about the day's progress on the house. "Ethan," she said quietly, "your hand is resting where our baby is growing." He froze, his eyes going wide. "What?" "Delilah, are you saying that you are with child?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am scared. What if I am a terrible mother? What if I hurt our baby the way my father hurt me?" Ethan pulled her close, his own eyes wet. "You will be a wonderful mother, Delilah. You are the strongest, bravest, most loving person I know. Our child will be so lucky to have you." He placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "When?" "Late summer, I think. August or September. Then we need to get the house finished and moved before the baby comes. I want you and our child safe and settled in our own home." The knowledge of the coming baby seemed to energize them both. Ethan worked even harder on the house, and as spring arrived and the ground thawed, progress accelerated. The frame went up quickly, and then the walls, and then the roof. Delilah spent hours choosing paint colors and planning the arrangement of rooms, making sure the house would be both functional and beautiful. Howard visited often, bringing supplies and helping with construction. He seemed genuinely happy for them, and Delilah realized that his loneliness had eased with the return of neighbors to the area. By late May, the house was finished enough to be livable. It was a simple 2-story structure with 4 rooms downstairs, a parlor, kitchen, dining room, and a small bedroom they were keeping aside as a guest room. Upstairs were 2 larger bedrooms, one for them and one that would become the nursery. Moving day was an adventure, with Howard lending his wagon and several ranch hands to help transport their belongings and the furniture they had purchased. Delilah walked through her new home with wonder, touching walls and windowsills, hardly believing this beautiful place belonged to them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lancaster," Ethan said, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her over the threshold. "Welcome to the rest of our lives." They spent the summer building their ranch in earnest. Ethan purchased 6 bred cows and a bull from Howard, the beginning of their herd. He built corrals and a small barn, working from dawn until dusk every day. Delilah planted her garden and tended the house, her body growing round with their child. She felt healthy and strong despite her expanding waistline, and she took fierce pride in the vegetables she coaxed from the Wyoming soil. Neighbors came to visit and welcome them, the community embracing the young couple starting out. Delilah found herself forming real friendships with other ranch wives, women who understood the challenges and rewards of frontier life. She no longer felt alone or afraid, but part of something larger than herself. In late August, on a night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Delilah went into labor. Ethan rode hard to Buffalo to fetch the doctor and Rosa, who had experience as a midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Delilah was sure she would not survive. But Ethan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and talking her through the pain, his voice steady and calm even though she could see the fear in his eyes. Just as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born, screaming his displeasure at being thrust into the world. Delilah held him to her chest, marveling at his tiny perfect fingers and the way his eyes, dark blue like all newborns, seemed to look right at her. "He is beautiful," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "You did so well, Delilah. I am so proud of you." They named him Thomas, after Ethan's father, with the hope that their son would inherit the good qualities of the man he had been before alcohol destroyed him. Little Thomas was a good baby, nursing eagerly and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Delilah discovered that motherhood came more naturally than she had feared, and Ethan was a devoted father, always ready to walk the floor with a fussy baby or change a soiled diaper. The years passed in a blur of hard work and slow progress. Their herd grew, first to a dozen cattle, then 20, then 50. They added chickens and pigs, and Delilah's garden expanded to include not just vegetables but flowers that brightened the yard. The house acquired touches that made it a home, curtains and quilts and photographs on the walls. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. When he was 2, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a quiet baby with blonde hair and a thoughtful expression. 2 years later came another son, James, who was loud and energetic from the moment he entered the world. Life was not easy. There were droughts and hard winters, cattle lost to disease or predators, injuries and setbacks that threatened to undo their progress. But through it all, Delilah and Ethan faced each challenge together, their love and partnership growing stronger with each passing year. Delilah's fears gradually faded until they were just memories, stories she could tell without pain. She no longer flinched at sudden movements or loud voices. She could accept hugs and affection without hesitation. She had learned to trust not just Ethan, but herself, discovering reserves of strength and courage she had not known existed. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised her with a trip to Buffalo, arranging for Rosa and Howard to watch the children. They had dinner at the same restaurant where they had first eaten together all those years ago, and afterward, they walked through town hand in hand. "Do you remember when you first arrived here?" Ethan asked as they paused in front of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. "You were so frightened, like a wild creature ready to bolt at any moment." "I remember," Delilah said. "I remember thinking I had made a terrible mistake, that I would never be able to trust anyone again." "What changed?" Delilah turned to face her husband, this man who had kept every promise he had ever made to her. "You changed. Or rather, you changed me by refusing to give up, by earning my trust one day at a time until I had no choice but to believe you were real and honest and good. You saved me, Ethan Lancaster." "No," Ethan said, pulling her close. "You saved yourself, Delilah. You chose courage over fear, hope over despair. I just had the privilege of being there to witness your transformation and love you through it." They kissed under the Wyoming stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from pain and possibility. Their ranch was thriving, their children healthy, their love deep and true. It was not the life Delilah had imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago, terrified and alone. It was so much better. The years continued to unfold with their mix of challenges and blessings. The Lancaster Ranch became known throughout the territory for quality cattle and honest dealing. Ethan's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew, and they were able to purchase more land, expanding their holdings until they had over 1,000 acres. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved working with the cattle and learning every aspect of ranching from his father. Sarah became an accomplished rider and developed a talent for training horses, gentle but firm in her handling. James, the youngest, inherited his mother's way with growing things and spent hours in the garden and experimenting with crops. Delilah watched her children grow with a joy mixed with bittersweet awareness of how fast time moved. She and Ethan had given them something precious, a childhood free from fear, filled with love and security, and the knowledge that they were valued and protected. Breaking the cycle of pain that had defined her own early years felt like the greatest achievement of her life. Howard remained a close friend and neighbor, often joining them for Sunday dinners and holidays. He never remarried, content with his ranch and his role as honorary uncle to the Lancaster children. He and Ethan partnered on several ventures, pooling resources to improve both their operations. When Delilah was 38, she discovered to her surprise that she was expecting again. The pregnancy was harder than her earlier ones, her body older and less resilient. But in the spring of 1887, she gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace, who arrived early but healthy. "Our family is complete," Ethan said as he cradled both babies, one in each arm, his face shining with pride and love. "5 beautiful children and the most amazing wife a man could ask for." The twins grew up adored by their older siblings and parents, completing the Lancaster family in ways none of them had anticipated. The house was always full of noise and activity, laughter and occasional arguments, the normal chaos of a large family. As Delilah approached 40, she sometimes stood on her porch at sunset and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. The frightened young woman who had arrived in Buffalo over 15 years ago seemed like a different person, someone she barely recognized. That Delilah had been broken and afraid, convinced that she would never escape the shadows of her past. This Delilah was strong and confident, a successful rancher and mother, a woman who had faced her demons and won. She had learned that love did not have to hurt, that men could be gentle and kind, that trust was possible even after betrayal. Ethan had kept his promise, earning that trust one day at a time until it was as natural as breathing. Their children grew and eventually began leaving to start their own lives. Thomas married a girl from Buffalo and took over managing the southern section of the ranch. Sarah shocked everyone by moving to Cheyenne and opening a horse training business that became quite successful. James stayed close to home, homesteading land adjacent to the ranch and starting his own farming operation. The twins, being younger, remained at home longer, and Delilah treasured the extra years with them. Emma showed talent for sewing and design, often traveling to town to help the dressmaker. Grace had inherited her father's business sense and kept the ranch accounts with meticulous precision. As the 19th century drew to a close, Wyoming achieved statehood, and Buffalo grew from a frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and businesses. The Lancaster Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the area, a testament to decades of hard work and smart management. Ethan's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Delilah, he was as handsome as the day she married him. Her own hair showed threads of silver, and her hands bore the marks of years of labor, but she carried her age with pride. They had earned every gray hair and wrinkle through lives fully lived. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors from miles around. The celebration lasted all day, with food and music and dancing. Delilah found herself surrounded by family and friends, people who loved and respected her, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the unexpected gift of this life. As evening fell and the party continued, Ethan pulled her away for a walk to their favorite spot, the high meadow where he had proposed all those years ago. The meadow looked much the same, though now cattle grazed where wild grass had once grown, and a well-worn path led up from their ranch house. 20 years, Ethan said, pulling Delilah close against his chest. 20 years of marriage, and I love you more today than I did the day we wed. I never thought I could have this, Delilah said softly. A home, a family, love that felt safe. You gave me all of that, Ethan. We gave it to each other, Ethan corrected. You had the courage to trust when trust seemed impossible. You had the strength to heal and grow and build a new life. I was just lucky enough to be part of your journey. They stood together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. Below them, Their ranch spread out in neat parcels of success and stability, the home they had built together from nothing but dreams and determination. The years continued their steady march. Howard passed away in his sleep at 70, leaving his ranch to Ethan in recognition of the man who had been like a son to him. The Lancaster holdings now encompassed most of the valley, though Ethan sold portions to each of their children at generous terms so they could establish themselves. Thomas and his wife gave Delilah and Ethan their first grandchildren, twin boys who reminded everyone of James and Thomas at that age. Sarah eventually married a horse trainer from Colorado and had 2 daughters. James and his wife had 4 children in rapid succession, keeping the family growing. The twins married in a double wedding when they were 22. Emma to a shopkeeper from Buffalo and Grace to a young lawyer who had recently moved to Wyoming from Boston. Both settled nearby, and Delilah took great joy in teaching her daughters-in-law and new daughters how to manage frontier households. As grandchildren multiplied, the ranch house that had once seemed so spacious began to feel crowded during family gatherings. Ethan built additions and a separate bunkhouse for visiting family, ensuring there was always room for everyone to come home. Delilah found unexpected joy in being a grandmother, gentler and more relaxed than she had sometimes been as a mother. She told her grandchildren stories of the old days, carefully edited tales of coming west and building the ranch. She taught the girls to sew and garden, the boys to ride and rope. She was patient with their mistakes and generous with praise, giving them the unconditional love she had never received from her own grandparents. On her 50th birthday, Delilah stood on her porch watching 3 generations of Lancasters fill her yard. There were over 30 people present, all connected to her by blood or marriage, all part of the family she and Ethan had created. The shy, frightened mail-order bride who had arrived in Buffalo so long ago would never have believed such abundance was possible. Ethan came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist in the comfortable gesture of a couple who had spent decades together. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive," Delilah said. "I am thinking about the scared girl I was and the strong woman I became, and how much of that transformation I owe to you." "You owe it to yourself," Ethan said firmly. "I just loved you. You did the hard work of healing and growing." "We did it together," Delilah said, echoing words he had spoken so many times over the years. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built together." As the new century approached, bringing changes and challenges none of them could imagine, Delilah and Ethan faced it as they had faced everything. Together, with love and faith and the unshakable trust that had been hard-won but had proved unbreakable. They celebrated the turn of the century surrounded by family, counting down the final seconds of 1899 with champagne and noisemakers. As midnight struck and 1900 began, Ethan kissed Delilah with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "Here is to the next century," he said, raising his glass. "May it be as blessed as the last one has been for us." "To family," Delilah added, "to love and trust and second chances." They drank as their children and grandchildren cheered, toasting to the future while honoring the past that had brought them to this moment. The years that followed were gentler, less frantic than the early days of building the ranch. Ethan gradually turned over the day-to-day operations to Thomas and James, though he remained involved in major decisions. Delilah reduced her workload as well, focusing on her garden and her grandchildren, and the simple pleasures of a life well lived. They traveled some, taking the train to Denver and once all the way to San Francisco, marveling at how the frontier they had known was rapidly vanishing. But they always returned to Wyoming, to the ranch, and the land they loved. On their 30th anniversary, Delilah woke to find Ethan already dressed and waiting with a surprise. He led her to the barn, where a beautiful buggy stood decorated with ribbons and flowers. "I am taking you back to where it all started," he said, helping her into the seat. "Back to Buffalo, back to the beginning." They drove into town, which had grown considerably over the years but still retained its frontier character. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house still stood, though Mrs. Henderson herself had passed away years ago. The Wells Fargo office where Delilah had first arrived was now a bank. The restaurant where they had shared awkward meals still served dinner, though under new ownership. Ethan took her to each place, recounting memories and reminding her how far they had come. Finally, they stopped at the church where they had married, walking up the aisle hand in hand. "30 years ago I made promises to you in this church," Ethan said. "I promised to love you, honor you, cherish you. I promised to earn your trust one day at a time. Did I keep those promises, Delilah?" "Every single day," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. "You kept them every single day, Ethan. You saved my life." "And you gave my life meaning," Ethan said. "You taught me that patience and gentleness are strengths, not weaknesses. You showed me what real courage looks like. You gave me a family and a purpose and love beyond measure. I am the luckiest man who ever lived." They renewed their vows there in the empty church, promising again to love and cherish each other for whatever time remained. It felt sacred and right. This reaffirmation of promises first spoken 3 decades earlier by two young people who had no idea what they were building. As they drove home in the summer sunshine, Delilah reflected on the incredible gift of the life she had been given. She had survived horrors that should have destroyed her, faced fears that could have paralyzed her forever. Instead, she had found the courage to trust again, to love again, to build something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. She looked at Ethan, his profile strong and familiar, his hands steady on the reins. This man had kept his promise, earning her trust one day at a time until fear was just a memory and love was the foundation of everything she knew. Together they had built a ranch, raised a family, created a legacy that would last for generations. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I had no belief in myself, for loving me when I did not think I could be loved. For keeping your promises, Ethan. For earning my trust one day at a time until trusting you was as natural as breathing." Ethan reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together in a gesture as familiar as it was precious. "It was my honor and privilege," he said simply. "Every single day, Delilah. Every single day." They drove home to their ranch, to their children and grandchildren, to the life they had built through love and patience and unwavering commitment. The frightened mail-order bride and the patient cowboy had become something more. Partners, best friends, soulmates who had proven that trust, once earned, could last a lifetime. And as the buggy rolled up the drive to their home, with family spilling out onto the porch to greet them, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, living exactly the life she was meant to live, loved by the man who had taught her that love did not have to hurt, that trust was possible, and that healing, though difficult, was worth every moment of fear it took to achieve. Their story did not end with dramatic gestures or grand pronouncements, but with the quiet certainty of two people who had chosen each other every day for 30 years, and would continue choosing each other for however many days remained. It was a love story written in small moments and patient waiting, in trust earned one day at a time, in promises kept and faith rewarded. It was, Delilah thought as Ethan helped her down from the buggy and their grandchildren ran to greet them, the best love story she could have ever imagined. And it was hers, truly and completely hers, earned through courage and built on the foundation of a cowboy's promise to earn her trust, one day at a time, for the rest of their lives.